Hello, I'm Maria Titizian, and this is the Week in Review. This week in the news, Pashinyan and Aliyev meet on the sidelines of the European Political Summit, Health Ministry to roll out universal healthcare next year, and Armenia to build a small modular nuclear reactor to replace the aging Metsamor. Tune into our weekly roundup of the news with me, Maria Titizian. This week, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan addressed the 80th UN General Assembly. In his address, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev framed his speech around what he called Azerbaijan's victory and a new era of peace. He repeated references to Armenia's capitulation and again invoked the so-called Zangezur corridor in the context of the Trump Road for Peace and Prosperity, otherwise known as TRIP. Aliyev portrayed the 2020 war as an act of self-defense under the UN Charter, insisting that Azerbaijan complied with humanitarian law while accusing Armenia of targeting civilians. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan criticized Aliyev in his speech for continuing to invoke the Zangezur corridor despite the August 8 Washington Accords that defined the project as TRIP, explicitly respecting Armenia's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and jurisdiction. He warned that such rhetoric fuels conflict by presenting territorial demands absent from any negotiated documents and questioned Aliyev's continued references to Armenia's capitulation despite the peace already established. Pashinyan also emphasized the importance of opening the border with Turkey as part of this infrastructure vision, noting that TRIP could lay the foundation for diplomatic relations and the full reopening of the interstate border. But he stressed that building peace requires more than infrastructure. Clarifying the fate of missing persons and ensuring the release of those still held in captivity remain essential parts of Armenia's daily peace agenda. At the UN, Pashinyan also outlined Armenia's European aspirations. He pointed to the law adopted in March on initiating the process of EU membership, describing it as both a reflection of Armenia's deepening ties with Brussels and a commitment to democratic values. He stressed that aligning with EU standards is not a geopolitical choice, but a democratic one, rooted in the reforms launched since the 2018 revolution. Looking ahead, Pashinyan said the government plans to consolidate these democratic gains with a nationwide referendum after the 2026 elections to adopt a new constitution, making it more people-centered. Armenia's parliament held an extraordinary session this week and adopted a declaration in support of peace with Azerbaijan. The opposition factions, the Armenia and I Have Honor alliances, boycotted the vote. Drafted by the ruling Civil Contract Party, the declaration reaffirms Armenia's sovereignty and territorial integrity, stresses the importance of peaceful coexistence with neighbors, and welcomes the initialing of the Agreement on the Establishment of Peace and Interstate Relations. It also highlights Armenia's role in implementing the TRIP project and calls on both sides to avoid rhetoric that could reignite conflict. Opposition parties were quick to dismiss the move. The Armenia Alliance called the declaration misleading, saying it ignores key issues like the withdrawal of Azerbaijani troops, the release of POWs, the return of displaced Artsakh Armenians, and protection of cultural heritage. The I Have Honor bloc went further, denouncing it as a document of unilateral concessions and accusing the government of trading away national interests. Meanwhile, Pashinyan and Aliyev met on the sidelines of the 7th European Political Community Summit in Copenhagen. They emphasized the significance of the Washington Accords, reaffirming their commitment to further consolidating peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. They discussed regional transport, infrastructure development in Azerbaijan, and the progress of Armenia's TRIP project, exchanging views on implementing the Washington Declaration. Pashinyan's press office noted that both sides welcomed the unanimous decision to terminate the OSCE Minsk group process and all related structures. On the sidelines, Pashinyan met with French President Emmanuel Macron, discussing Armenia-France cooperation, regional developments, and the TRIP project. He also met with European Council President Antonio Costa and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, focusing on Armenia-EU ties, democratic reforms, and economic cooperation. The EU leaders reaffirmed their support for Armenia's sovereignty and territorial integrity and also for its reform agenda. At the closing session of the EPC, Pashinyan announced that Yerevan will host the next summit on May 4. He said the event will highlight Armenia's democratic progress and deepen integration with Europe, with connectivity as the central theme, advancing the Middle Corridor, ensuring free movement of goods, energy, and digital infrastructure, and strengthening resilience against hybrid threats while safeguarding democracy and the rule of law. Also this week, Prime Minister Pashinyan addressed the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, otherwise known as PACE, highlighting the Council's role in Armenia's democratic foundations. He said membership gives Armenia confidence to pursue reforms, knowing support is available when challenges arise. Since the 2018 revolution, Pashinyan noted Armenia has held genuinely competitive elections, a historic shift, although he did admit that issues like vote buying, disinformation, and hybrid attacks persist. He also pushed back against the so-called Zangezur corridor. Now, responding to a question from UK Member of Parliament Edward Lee, he clarified that the Washington agreements make no mention of the term. Calling it a violation of Armenia's sovereignty, Pashinyan urged Azerbaijan to clarify exactly what it means on the map, warning that if it refers to Armenian territory, it directly challenges the country's sovereignty. He condemned the use of illegitimate terminology in what he called a respected forum. In other news, Armenia has decided to build a small modular nuclear reactor to replace the Metsamor plant when it is scheduled to be decommissioned in 2036. Pashinyan announced in Parliament that the government is in talks with 5 countries, the US, Russia, China, South Korea, and France, exploring proposals that are focused on cost, safety, and efficiency. No partner has been chosen yet, and expert teams are visiting potential sites to evaluate options with a contract expected within 1 to 2 years. Pashinyan stressed the decision is based purely on technical and economic factors with no geopolitical implications. Meanwhile, Armenia and the US have begun negotiations under the 123 agreement on peaceful nuclear cooperation. Following memoranda signed in Washington, the agreement will provide a legal framework for sharing nuclear technology, data, and knowledge under strict non-proliferation standards. A U.S. Customs and Border Protection team will work with Armenian border guards from September 29 to October 11 to assess capabilities and identify areas for improvement, the U.S. Embassy in Yerevan announced. The goal is to pinpoint needs and guide strategic investments. The embassy said that this is the first step in implementing the Crossroads of Peace capacity building partnership, again, part of the August 8 Accords. This was one of the 3 MOUs actually signed by the leaders in Washington, aimed at facilitating exchanges of best practices between the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and Armenia's border guard troops, part of the National Security Service and State Revenue Committee. Border security cooperation was first agreed in January when Yerevan and Washington signed a strategic partnership. At that time, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced that a Customs and Border Patrol team would soon travel to Armenia to work on border security capacity building, a visit that was later delayed. And there's been plenty of aviation news in Armenia this week. Hungarian low-cost carrier Wizz Air officially opened its 34th base at Zvartnots International Airport in Yerevan, stationing 2 Airbus aircraft. The airline will now operate flights to 16 destinations across 9 countries and also launched a new route from Gyumri to Larnaca in Cyprus. Meanwhile, Turkey's national carrier, Turkish Airlines, announced plans to begin operating flights from Armenia. The company hasn't shared details yet, saying only that flights will depend on market conditions and available opportunities. And in local news, parents of soldiers missing from the 44-day war staged protests this week outside the Defense Ministry demanding answers and a meeting with Chief of the General Staff Edward Asaryan and former Artsakh Defense Army Commander Gamo Vartanyan. Tensions arose amid a heavy police presence, occasionally sparking scuffles. On September 29, Asaryan met with protesters for several hours, but parents said their concerns were not fully addressed. The Defense Ministry said protesters were treated respectfully and no excessive force was used, though some threw bottles and other objects at military police. Since the war, the fate of 172 servicemen and 19 civilians, neither listed as casualties nor captives, remains unknown. The European Court of Human Rights has ordered Azerbaijan to report on the detention conditions and health of 23 Armenian prisoners being held in Baku, with a deadline set for November 4th. These prisoners have been in complete isolation for about 3 months with no independent monitoring, and their health and psychological state remain unknown. The International Committee of the Red Cross last visited them in June, but suspended all activities in Baku in September at Azerbaijan's request. The Court of Cassation has upheld the 5.5-year prison sentence of former Artsakh Defense Army Commander Jalal Harutyunyan. His appeal was rejected, with the court ruling that the appellate process was free of errors in affirming his wartime conviction. This is from the 44-day war. Earlier this year, Harutyunyan was sentenced for negligence in military service. He was blamed for giving a flawed order that led to 20 soldiers being killed and the unit falling under Azerbaijani control. Investigators said he misidentified incoming Azerbaijani forces as Armenian. Harutyunyan denied negligence, arguing that responsibility lay with divisional leadership, not him. He admitted only that he had suggested they might be ours, a claim that lower-ranking officers failed to verify. Armenia's health ministry has unveiled a draft bill on universal health care set to roll out next year in 3 phases, and it will last until 2028. The insurance package will cover a wide range of medical services from preventive care and consultations to diagnostics, treatment, hospital and outpatient care, emergency services, chronic disease management, medications, rehabilitation, and prosthetics. Groups fully covered by the state include children under the age of 18, students under 26, without parental care, people over 65, persons with disabilities, Chernobyl cleanup participants, active military personnel and their families, retired soldiers, mothers, or adoptive parents caring for children under the age of 2, World War II veterans, and individuals in social support programs. For others, contributions will depend on income and employment type. Salaried employees and individual entrepreneurs will pay 100%, while farmers will pay 80%. Annual contributions are expected to range from $120,000 to $164,000 AMD. This is about anywhere from $310 to $428, set each year by the state budget. The Japanese government is providing $1.7 million to modernize air quality monitoring stations and purchase new equipment for Armenia's Hydrometeorology and Monitoring Center. The Environment Ministry says the funding will strengthen Armenia's air pollution monitoring system, improve data quality, enhance forecasting, and support a healthier, more sustainable environment. It will also help with environmental protection, climate change mitigation, sustainable urban development, and public health. Environment Minister Hambarzum Madevosyan noted that Armenia has already acquired 2 modern monitoring sites last year with state funding, and Japan's grant will continue and expand these efforts. Armenia's investigative committee has launched a case for incitement to suicide following the death of Boris Avakian, former deputy head of Artsakh State Emergency Service, who reportedly took his life at the Armenian consulate in St. Petersburg last week. The committee has not yet said if it will coordinate with Russian authorities. Avakian had escaped from a St. Petersburg courthouse the day before, where he faced detention for more than 4.2 billion rubles, this is about $51,000 in unpaid customs duties. He later sent a video to a journalist claiming consulate officials refused his extradition request. Armenia's ambassador to Russia denied this, saying staff worked hours to facilitate it. Avakian faced legal troubles in both Armenia, where he was wanted for money laundering and illegal border crossing, and Russia, and had been dismissed from his post in Artsakh in 2021 for abuse of office and workplace violations. And as always, I want to tell you about some of the articles that we published this week. Today, we published the September security report. It's called Why Aliyev Agreed to the American Proposal, Azerbaijan and the Washington Accords, as always by Dr. Nerses Kopalyan. And he says, why did Aliyev, whose aversion to peace, penchant for conflict persistence and aggression, and an immense power capacity, agreed to a normalization process that diminishes his position of maximalist power posturing? Well, he explains how the answer lies in shifting U.S. negotiation strategies, altered incentive structures, and Baku's strategic calculus. And, as we talked about at the top of the news about the speeches at UNGA, Sosi Tatikian penned an article called Armenia versus Azerbaijan, Competing Narratives at the UN. It was interesting because it came, on the heels of the 5th anniversary of the 2020 Artsakh War. So both Aliyev and Pashinyan addressed the UNGA with sharply contrasting narratives. Aliyev employed cognitive warfare, this is according to Sosi Tatikian, to assert dominance and legitimize past aggression, while Prime Minister Pashinyan exercised narrative constraint, emphasizing sovereignty, reciprocity, and constructive peace building. And this week we also launched our next issue of Salt, our lifestyle magazine. It's called On Heels, and it's again a very eclectic, very cool compilation of articles. The first one is called "Silence Must Be Kept: Co-working at the National Library." This is by Maria Gunko, and she writes that inside Yerevan's National Library, Soviet grandeur collides with a digital work culture. Once a temple to knowledge, the vast halls of the library now host students, scholars, and freelancers alike, each negotiating silence, discomfort, and architectural awe in an unlikely co-working experiment. And our Lilit Markaryan did a profile on a very interesting character, Levon Tokmakjian. He is a sculptor. It's called Levon Tokmakjian's Bronze Dust and Marble Dreams. And so she spent the day with him at Yerevan's abandoned clock factory. And 88-year-old sculptor Tokmakjian continues shaping Armenia's memory in stone and bronze, his life spanning some triumphs, personal trials, and a legacy of public monuments reveals an artist whose work bridges history and endurance. The next one in Salt is another interesting and fun piece by Gaia Balyan. It's called Lavash Life, Exporting Armenian Culture and Identity Through Memes. Now, Lavash Life, many of you, I suspect, know, is a page on Instagram. It's a meme page. It was created by Aris Mardirosyan, and it blends humor with heritage to connect Armenians living in the diaspora, with locals and curious outsiders. And Lavash Life has over 112,000 followers. It transforms memes into cultural bridges, fostering identity, connection, and inclusivity. And it's actually quite funny to go through. So I encourage you to read the piece and also check out Lavash Life. And this one by Manik Georgelin, it's a beautiful piece, and it's called "How Does One Get Around with a Wheelchair in Armenia?" It's a very personal story by Manik, and she shares what it's like to move around Armenia in a wheelchair, the challenges, the kindness of strangers, and why better accessibility matters for building a more welcoming and inclusive society. And that's the week that we had here in Armenia. Thank you for listening. Have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we'll be back again next week.